So anyway, this is part 3. It's always nice to sort of go to a park. It's probably a bit more difficult talking in my flat because where it's situated, there's just like neighbours everywhere, and it draw a lot of it. Well, it wouldn't draw any attention, but I don't want people to think, oh, well, he's talking about aliens. What's going on there? So we go into my experiences, and we go. Well, I'm going to talk about my dad actually. So before I was born, I was already in the house, my parents' house. And it was a heat wave. It was a massive heat wave, really hot for ages. And my dad had an experience whereby he felt he had a heart attack. So I think I was just born. Shortly after I was born, that's probably why he had a heart attack. Probably gave him a shite. It was just a fright, shite. So basically, he felt that he had a heart attack, and then he was laid on his bed, and he told me that he saw. Basically, he saw what he thought was his spirit on the wardrobe, but it was partly merged within the wardrobe, looking back at him, and it was smiling. So he was paralysed. He says from the chest down, so he couldn't move, which is what being paralysed is. But he can use his head and he look. But he was sort of in fear, and he had a heart attack, and he felt like he saw himself on the wardrobe. But the other thing with this thing that looks like him, whether it was a part of him, it smirked at him. It had this same sort of smile, and it sort of fits in with what I mentioned about earlier with seeing my sister. I did research that, and they call them ghosts of the living, where you see someone who's actually alive somewhere else. So maybe it was some sort of like dimensional thing. I mean, we don't really understand how this universe works. I mean, all the same atoms are still on the planet. So, and then these atoms will go on forever. So it's, or they'll reform in some way. So, and then there's an element where time is more perception than actually something of reality. It's more of a construct for reality. So, yeah. So I'll continue this little talk I was doing. Basically, even in the park, it seems to draw a lot of attention. Like, who was he talking to? But some of these things you want to sort of. I mean, I don't mind openly discussing on the YouTube capacity, but I wouldn't go around saying aliens and all these other things. So for my father's experience, basically, so he's seen himself, seen his image, seen something that looks like him. Hasn't really made sense. I've had a sort of similar experience, but I've seen my sister, and he kind of, things for my dad went downhill basically. He got into trouble with money. He got to the point where he wasn't being very sensible. He had these ideas going through his mind, and he was getting messed about by somebody because he was self-employed. Somebody had a lot of money. He was saying, like, you can do all this work for me, that's fine, I'll pay you. And he never did. And he said, oh yeah, I've got some more work and I'll pay you next time. And he sort of messed him around, and it was really disgusting how he was treated in that period of his time. I mean, the guy would have known he had children, he had to support them. So he got in some situations where he thought, well, what do I do? So he borrowed money, and he borrowed loads of money, and this is where the banks, this is why they're the enemy of the world, to be honest, in this sense, because they didn't really care what he did at that point. So he took really high interest loans, and he started messing around with stocks and shares. He invested in stocks and shares, and it all fell through basically, and it was illogical, all these things he started doing. But he basically developed schizophrenia, and if you know, it's a neurological disorder. It's not something like you're born with it, here we go. But it could be that people have got susceptibility to it and they develop it. And I've mentioned this before in other videos. If you've got some sort of Irish Celtic connections, and I think Africans, sort of high percentage of people can develop schizophrenia. Let's be quite clear about this. But there might be other disorders that we don't develop. So it's one of these things. So swings and roundabouts. Yeah, so for him, he went through a period where he had a mental breakdown. I recall it quite clearly. He was sort of he started shouting down the phone, he put the phone down to the person. The person was like saying, probably asking him, could you do some work for me? Blah, blah, blah. He said, well, you don't pay me right. And, it got a bit funny. And then he just put the phone down, and he got really fed up and upset. To be honest, what you call upset is that he just went into a bit of a trance. And the first thing he went to the front room. He looked out the curtains. And he just looked into space, and he was like, "What's happening here?" So he severely went through some sort of mental change there. But I don't think it was probably the only factor. It's not just, we can't just look at things and say, "Oh yeah, science says," because they don't know enough about anything, to be honest, and they might just want you to believe something because it's easy for them. It's like, well, if we tell them that this is what it is, then that'll be the practice. This is my education. This is what it meant, and I get my award, and this goes down as fact, but it's not really. And then they look at probably ways to market drugs and so on. I mean, for my dad, he needs without his anti psychotic meds, he would slowly drift into some different parallel world, and it would be full of fear and anxiety. But when he's on this meds, it's fine. He doesn't have really anxieties or any issues like that. But he has said things. He said certain things about sort of. I mean, basically, the other thing about being quite clear about schizophrenia is what people don't know is it doesn't mean the person's dangerous, because not unless they've been raised in an environment that was with violence or drug abuse or something like that. I mean, most people's mental state of mind is that they tend to want to find neutrality and find peace with the people around them. So that's one of the main things. It's when people are unstable and they're in fear of their life that they start to act a bit strange, irrational, or they have certain coping mechanisms that they rely on, and some of it could be intimidation, fear. Some of it could be that they become self-abusive in some way. So there's lots of things. But anyway, that doesn't apply to my dad. Basically, so he's developed this what we classify as a mental disorder, and basically, but some of the stuff he's told me. Because that's the main thing. You want to engage. You don't want to be there criticising people. We do this far too much in society. Someone says something different or something that they consider outlandish, you say no, and then you resort back to some indoctrinated thinking, and it would be either science says this, or religion. And to be honest, unless you read the religion, there's no point making profound statements. And science, unless you're actually thinking in a scientific framework, and you actually are a scientist, there's no point using that as your foundation for your understanding, because you're not really thinking there. You're just quoting. It's actually politics. All you're doing. You're saying, oh yeah, well it says this in Darwin, says this, Dr. Freud, whatever. There's a lot more to life than just looking at that and then becoming something that regurgitates information. So he's told me things, and I thought, oh yeah, he said 60 billion spirits are in there since. So I thought, there doesn't be that many people alive. So don't quote me, I can't exactly remember the figure, just in case you're actually he's wrong or whatever. But I googled it, and it said, yeah, it basically came up there. So since the start of the human race, that there's been about 60 billion spirits or something like that. So there's things he's told me, and I've cross-referenced it. Well, actually, you're right. He's sort of there isn't a God, but there is a God, and this, and well, yeah, you're right there. That's another thing there as well, is that we have a perception of what God is, and so therefore we conform our belief system to that perception. But actually, it's beyond us. But there's something more profound and esoteric I can talk about another time. But my feelings is that whatever's happened there could have also influenced his mind and affected, it's kind of tortured him to a certain point, tormented him, and also, I can't imagine what his mind's completely like, but he has a point where his mind thoughts supersede whatever's coming into him. There's other times where he hears something where perceives it as voices, spirits, and they tell him something. So they're telling him their idea, or saying sometimes they criticise him, sometimes they tell him something. Like I said, oh, you are God. And I said, well, we're all God. That's what I try. I can have these sort of metaphorical conversations that are actually based on reality. The reality is everything is God. Because, well, anyway, that's another subject. So that's this next part. Where am I? 3 or was it 3? Yeah. Yeah, let's go on to that. This is my end of part 3, and then I'll go on to part 4 and I'll take some more info.